Davidson. So I think most people are here because they know who Art is, and I certainly, as a...
There's a whole bunch of other people who didn't come because they know who Art Davidson is.
So, as a relatively recent Alaskan, I really only know Art by reputation. I know I'm a whole lot better now as a result of a chit-chat over the last hour. Art just flew in from my homeland, New Zealand, about 10 days ago.
My son Joe and I were down.
And Joe as well, yeah. So you get to practice your Kiwi accent for the rest of the evening. But Art, as most of you will know, along with Dave Johnston, who we've got here tonight, were two of the first three winter ascensionists of Denali in 1967. The wind chill factor on that trip reached minus 148 degrees, hence the title of the book which Art has with him tonight. Art has published several other books on environmental and Indigenous issues. Has done some incredible work in Iraq and in Ukraine with orphans from those conflicts. His book, Minus 148, he's got a few copies here tonight, which he will sign along with Dave. And he wanted to offer them as a fundraiser for the club.
Yeah, I just thought of this on the way in. I usually don't have an extra copy, but I have a few, and we thought that with Dave here, we could both sign it if that is of interest to anybody. And what we were thinking, I mean, it was just an idea that came up about 30, 40 minutes ago.
Sounds like a darn good idea.
But it's all for a benefit for the club, so you can buy some hot dogs or some good gorp or something for the next outing.
So we need people to buy these books so we can afford the next Christmas function.
Okay.
We thought that $50 would be a nice price for an autographed book. So feel free to come up and approach Art.
Yeah, if that sounds like too much, $30, $20, 50 cents. You got lots of dough in your pocket, $100. It's all for the club. Whatever.
But ladies and gentlemen, he's got a head of steam already. Welcome, please, Art Davidson.
So, kind of surprised to be here tonight. I bumped into one of the members here on a road out in Rainbow Valley, and he said, "Oh gosh, you should come in and the club." I said, "Oh yeah, okay." And I sort of imagined just sort of sitting around and sharing stories, because I'd love to hear your stories of what you do. And I mean, my God, aren't we fortunate to have the Chugach right here? I mean, is that crazy or what? And the Talkeetnas and the Alaska Range, and I mean, the Chattanooga Spires. I mean, we're just so fortunate up here. So anyway, this sort of thinking we just come in and have a nice visit morphed into, we talk about the winter climb of Denali, which is okay, but there's a lot of other things to talk about. But I invited my close friend, and Dave. Many of you may know Dave. He's just such a great guy. And as we start talking about what we did, I'm going to why don't you say hi to him, Dave?
Howdy. I'm from CSU.
That translates as I'm from CSU.
Yodel and see if they can hear you.
Yo.
Can you hear that? I think it's working.
It's really good to see so many faces that look like they've been out in the spring weather in the hills. I've been ducking in and out of the hospital lately and just feel like a faded something. Fossil, I guess.
You're a heck of a lot more than a fossil, Dave.
Anyway, this guy is awesome. And I hope someday maybe Art and Joe can do a program on Ukraine, because they've been over there doing some really good stuff. Smuggling generators.
Oh, that's true.
And actually pounding nails. In the video we saw, Joe was just a superhero. When they said goodbye to Joe, it was Joe. Everybody cheering. That was neat to see.
Joe was over there for about 3 months in the early months of the war. We had a chance to work with some Ukrainians to start an orphanage, and I was just there, and Sean, you were there, Anna were there. First time just Joe, Sean and I, but Joe stayed for was it about 3 months, Joe? Yeah. And it really helped get us started. Yeah, the kids loved it. So anyway, as we get going here, Dave, you just nudge me if you want to say something, and I'd welcome questions anytime. You can interrupt me. There's no exact anything I'm exactly going to tell, but I just like to share the evening with you, and I'm so glad that Dave is here, and there's some other good friends like Tom. You all know Tom Meacham, right? And Dar Jamal, he's been out and away from Alaska a lot, but he's a wonderful guy. He used to be both a rescue guy in Denali as well as a guide. And Dar, man, first time I met Dar, it was at our storage place. He was putting things into storage. I said, we somehow connected, and he knew I was a writer, and so I asked if he wrote. He was a journalist. What do you write? He said, well, I'm going to Iraq. Like, are you going with the Associated Press, the U.S. military? No, just on my own. I figured that's the last time I would see this guy. But he was, for some time, I don't know if it was months or a year or so, he was the only unembedded journalist from the West who was not embedded in the Green Zone. And I think it was your first book, Beyond the Green Zone. But he's a wonderful author. The End of Ice, another book he's done, and also something like We're in the Middle of Forever. And so Gar and I, our lives have intersected in different ways. But I tell you, I'm looking forward to talking, getting to know many of you. And I have another idea. I should probably ask my wife about this first with my kids. But I'm thinking, we have limited time tonight. It's supposed to be about Denali in winter, but we live who knows where Rainbow Valley is? You know where Rainbow Peak is? Yeah. Who's climbed Rainbow Peak? Whoa. We sometimes look up there and see you along the ridge. Anyway, we live out there where you see a little pond. That's where we live. And so I was thinking maybe sometime in June we could have like a potluck out there. Wow. What do you think, Anna? I'll help clean up. He tries to restrain me. Well, I would like to try to do that. Maybe we'll send out a general invitation to folks in the club. But just as a chance to sit around, and I want to hear your story, why you love the Chugach and why you're part of the Mountaineering Club and everything. So anyway, shall we just begin? So, yeah, please.
Real quick, mentioning the Chugach, what wasn't mentioned yet is you're one of the founding people that created the Chugach State Park 52 years ago. And so thank you for all the work that you and your peers did.
So I'll tell a little quick story about that since you brought it up. So my first trip in Alaska, I'm a Colorado boy. I hitchhike up O'Malley Road. I've got my little sleeping bag, and it's sort of late summer, and it gets to be, and I go up by Powerline Pass, and I'm up there about tree line, and I'm just settling down to go to sleep. Now, I knew there could be bears around, right? This is Alaska. I don't have a gun or anything like that. I didn't have pepper spray. I don't even know if they made it back in those days. So I remembered Mowgli, the Jungle Boy, and he scared away Shere Khan with fire, right? So I got some copies of I didn't buy them, old copies, discarded Anchorage Daily Newses, and I rolled them up and like torches. So I had 2 or 3 little rolled up torches ready and some matches. Before bedding down for the night, I sort of practiced, got up on my knees and okay, I can light this. And I just relaxed. Okay, I'm ready. And I start dozing off to sleep. And then I hear, it's like this faint, boom, my heart starts pounding, oh my God. And you look out there, and you know how those hummocks of grass, and it's deep twilight, and I see a hummock, is that the back of a grizzly, And I just sort of see some movement, no, that's just the wind in the grass. And I'm looking around like this, and I've got my torches ready. I hear it again, a little louder. And I'm ready to light my torch, and then I locate where it's coming from. There's this little red light crossing the sky. Well, the reason this played into starting the park, because a few years later, I married my first wife, and I'm trying to scrape together a living somehow, so I'd always check. It was sort of antiquated now, but newspapers used to have classified ads when they, you know, and I would look for something I could do in the classified ads to make some money. So I see one day, it's an advertisement for 24 million board feet to be clear cut out of Indian Valley. And that was the valley I came down into from the Power Line Pass. That was my first hike in Alaska. And it's beautiful, you know. It's one of the many beautiful places out there. So I called some friends and we got a little group together and we met with the big director of Division of Lands and we said, you know, look, it's going to take forever for those trees to grow back. Can't you cancel the sale? No, we have to go ahead. And I said, well, and I thought this would be a winning argument. I said, you know, Alaska doesn't have any state parks. If we have, you could start a state park and that'd be your legacy, you know? No. So, what can I do? Well, I was a really poor student my one semester of college. The one thing I did, though, I played a lot of poker. So what do you do when you don't have a winning hand, you know, and you don't want to fold? So you bluff. So I said, well, Mr. Keenan said, well, we appreciate you coming in. And I remember looking up at him. He's a state official. He wore a suit and tie, and I'm just in my scruffy like I am tonight. But anyway, he said, we'll appreciate talking to you in the future when these things come up. And so my mind is whirring. I got to come up with something. So I said, well, Mr. Keenan, I appreciate that. And we'll be glad to talk to you in the future. I got 2 or 3 allies like Sharon Sisson with me, maybe Pete Martin. But I hope you appreciate that we're going to have to take the Girl Scouts on television and explain why they're going to really miss camping out there in that beautiful valley. Whoa. Well, he said, I was totally bluffing. I probably a very small chance the parents would let their little Girl Scout girls go on TV and say, no, don't cut down my trees. But anyway, Keenan sort of coughed in his throat and said, well, tell you what, talk to the Attorney General. If he says we can cancel the sale, we'll do it. Next morning, I went to the Attorney General's office. He said, sure, we could cancel it. Keenan was bluffing too. He knew he could cancel the sale, you know? It was just the pressure of those little girls, what they might say on TV and how sad they'd be. So they're the impetus for the park. So anyway, we sat down in Skip Matthews' office. He was an attorney, and Sharon Sisson and a couple others. And we just had a map of all the land around Anchorage. So we just like with a black marker, we just, you know, the glaciers, the mountains out by Marcus Baker, all the state land. And so that's how the park came into existence. That's sort of the start. But the thing is, it was just such a wonderful outpouring in the community. There wasn't a lot of polarization between conservationists and people who want to, you know, dig up Alaska, and the Republicans and Democrats. It just caught on. Why don't we have state parks? And so, right along with Chugach State Park, we got Kachemak and I think Denali, and so that was the sort of the origin. But really, it was a lot of people talking to their legislators. Lowell Thomas Jr. introduced to the Senate, Helen Byrne in the House. So we've got this wonderful park. Somebody told me the other day that half of Alaskans live within 30 minutes of the park. So I just think I'm very touched by that. It's so beautiful. But anyway, so we came here to talk about Denali in the winter. Why in the heck would anybody want to do that? Anybody got an idea? I don't see. What?
Nobody had done it?
Well, yeah, I guess. You have to understand, it was a different era. It's like there wasn't a great rush and competition to be the first to go up there and freeze in Mount Denali in winter. And, but I think, I'll tell you what, I'll read a little something to you that it was right around the day that we had the idea to go climb up there. After my first summer in Alaska, I went back to Colorado. I came back up the next spring. My friend Shiro Nishimai, a Japanese climber from Osaka, he invited me to go with the Osaka Alpine Club. They were going to climb Denali. And from thousands of miles away in Japan, it seemed like a good idea for them to climb the south face. So we went up, camped into the south face. They decided a different route. But anyway, I had been eating their food, and it just started running through me. So I went from being very strong to being very weak. So I said, look, I'll just camp here, and you guys go up and climb. And they said, are you sure? And I said, sure, I'll just stay here. So for about 3 days, I just ate sort of powdered potatoes and really mild food. Then I got strong enough I could go outside the tent. And I'm standing outside the tent. It's so beautiful there on the south side of Denali. Some of you have been up there, right? It's just that little branch glacier off the Caleb. And I think I hear a chung, 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 chung. It disappears. It's almost like that bear sound that you don't know if you really heard it. And chung, 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 chung. And pretty soon there are 2 huge helicopters, big Hueys, coming up the glacier. Chung, 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 chung. And they land right in front of the south face. And I said, what's up with this? And then these people started getting out, and they all had matching bright red parkas and down parkas and down pants. And wow! And then pretty soon the helicopter, they unloaded a big box and lots of camping gear. And so I thought I'd amble over to see what this is all about. Now I had something past as climbing pants I got from Salvation Army, and one of those green army sweaters that holes in the elbows. I'd been up there, and so I was kind of acclimated. So I just wandered, as it happened, our set route went right by their camp. So I just ambled over, and they said, hi guys, how you doing? And there's Mike. They didn't know anybody else was up here. And somebody said, oh, he must live up here. and then I started shaking hands, Tom McCarthy. Tom Frost, and all these, it was a good number of the Everest climbers from like the year before. And so we talked a little bit, but they didn't invite me to sit and have dinner with them and camp with them. It was kind of like, we're doing our thing. I said, you guys gonna climb the mountain? Well, the south face, well, maybe. We have some equipment to test. And there was this big box. Do any of you have now an idea what might be in the box? Okay, I'll read you how I found out about this. So, when I asked what was in this is from, I'm going to read just a little tiny bit. I got nudged into writing a memoir of all things, oh my God. But anyway, this is how I wrote about it. I said, as we introduced ourselves, I was stunned. Willie Hunsel, Jim McCarthy, and so forth. When I asked what was in the big box, they said, oh, just some stuff. It was all a bit surreal. Their helicopters whirred off down the glacier. Sensing that they didn't really want me around, I wished them well and headed back to my tent. 53 years later, I learned what was in the box. 53 years. Quote, it's the stuff of James Bond movies are made of. An article in the Economic Times of India began. The Cold War setting, some of you might have an idea now. The Cold War setting, international espionage, and a failed expedition to plant a nuclear-powered spying device that gets lost.
Oh, yeah.
Quote, on June 23rd, 1965, that's where I was standing there meeting these guys, we did a trial run on Mount McKinley in Alaska, said Mohar Sin Kohli, leader of the Indian climbing team, after practicing with the radioactive device on Denali. Radioactive device up there. The climbers tried to place it on Nanda Devi, a sacred mountain in the Hindus, for the Hindus. But bad weather stopped them. Unable to carry it back, they left it on the mountain. Here was Jim McCarthy's response. He said, when I realized they're dumping the fucking generator and heading down the mountain, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, that's a quote that he said. So, have them bring it down. Are you crazy? So those guys quoted another guy. We went back in 1966 and 67. That's when we went up to Denali in the wintertime, remember? Beginning of 67. They went back in 66 and 67 to search for it, but no luck. But word got out that American climbers had been funded by a U.S. general known as Bombs Away LeMay. Bombs Away LeMay, he was well known for once threatening to bomb North Vietnamese back to the Stone Age. Well, a scandal erupted. Fearing that the Ganges River would be contaminated by plutonium, India closed Nanda Devi and the surrounding area to climbing and tourism for nearly a decade. So anyway, we were blissfully unaware of that. And to me, something really sweet and precious about that first time on Denali was, I'm just with these Japanese guys. This is 1965, 20 years earlier. My parents and their families have been fighting each other. A couple of them had relatives who died in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And here we were, just friends, and we're depending on each other in our lives. It was very sweet. So it was, I'm glad that I didn't know about that at the time. I would have been really, it would cast a pall over us and what we're doing. I mean, look, we can say the mountains are sacred, or we can just say we love being out there, it's peaceful. We don't want to be out there with a nuclear radioactive device. Anyway, so what happened was, Shiro and his friends came back down from the summit, and Shiro offered to take me back up. And I said, no, that's okay. I had a feeling I'd be back. And it was actually that very day that Shiro and I started saying, what's it like up here in the wintertime? Some of those ridges down there off the Kilna, at least early in the spring before they break away, there's huge cornices, right? What kind of storm packs those cornices in there? How cold is it gonna get? What's the wind gonna be like? Are we gonna be able to climb in the short days, the darkness? And so that was the intrigue. And that's, in a way, because it hadn't been done, but not because we wanted to say we're the first. There was no glory in it. There were no glossy climbing magazines. People weren't making films like Alone on the Wall. There was no sponsors. We were just really dirtbag climbers, and there were no women really interested. I mean, we were all smelly guys, and so there was no prestige in trying to, be out there in the mountains, right, Dar? So anyway, we tried to put a group together, Shiro and I, and one of the first people who wanted to go was this crazy guy, Dave Johnston. We met that year, I think, Dave, and our first climb together was on Kachatna Spire. And have any of you been up to the Kachatnas? Oh, all right, great. Any of you like to rock climb? Few? That's where the rock is. I mean, it's like crazy, beautiful granite, isn't it, Dave? Yeah, it is. So anyway, Dave and I and a few others were out there, and we climbed Kachatna Spire. And we decided we were going to go climb the Denali in the wintertime. He was crazy enough, but we actually found it hard to find people who wanted to go with us. I don't know why. We had a number of climbers that said, Denali, you're not going to make it. If you do, you're going to die. You're going to come back without your toes or hands. And we did lose a few toes. But anyway, we managed to put together a party, and the following winter, the winter of 66, 67, we went up there. And, we had a lot of experience with us. I'd asked Greg Blomberg out of Colorado. He started Colorado Mountain Industries the same time Chenard started Patagonia. They were both making little rock hammers and ice axes and pitons. Anybody would remember what a piton is? They're not used so much anymore. But anyway, so Greg was our leader, and George Wickman, a doctor here in town, we thought it'd be great to have a doctor. He wanted to go. Shiro, of course, Dave and I. And then at the last minute, two other people appeared and said, we want to go with you. Well, one of them was this pretty well-known French climber, Jacques Batkin, known as Farine, the one who carries big, heavy sacks of flour. I mean, he was just powerful, wasn't he, Dave? Really strong. And then he had this crazy guy with him, Ray Genet. And Ray Genet said, we said, well, what mountains have you climbed? He said, oh, he wrote them out on Pitts this, Pitts that. He's from Switzerland. So he gave us all these peaks that he climbed. Later I looked it up, and you can drive to the top of all these mountains. But anyway, so we sort of took Ray Genet because we knew his friend Farine would be strong, and so they came along. And then, if some of you have read the story, or if you've talked to me or others, we started out with such great high spirits and hopes. And we set a trail that we thought was safe, proved to be safe. But nobody had been up on these glaciers before in the wintertime. Now, if you're up on a glacier in the summer, you see where they start to sag, right? Snow softens, kind of sag. And then you test and everything. But here we are, and the whole hill is solid. It's like walking on a football field. There's just a couple inches of soft snow on the top. So we've established this trail. Now, I went off the trail just a little bit, maybe 30 feet, because the wind had blown the snow in these nice little rifts. You know, I don't know if you call them rifts, but nice little drifts. And I was filming, and I just thought they were so beautiful. And then I came back to the trail, and as I came back, I'm walking along, and then all of a sudden, kaboom, this. And I looked down, and it was just darkness down there. I poked through a crevasse, and it was very scary. I sort of, you know, you've been on ice before, and it's kind of thin, and it goes like this. That's what the snow 15, 20 feet around was like. And so I just, slowly and carefully as I could, I sort of tried to push my boot against the side, arch my back, and finally, just as gradually and easy as I could, roll back and away. Well, I knew that there were 3 other guys further up who were just about ready to come back. So I got on the trail, and I went up there and I said, guys, we gotta totally be careful here. There's the crevasses there. But I didn't realize there's 2 people were coming behind us. Dave was coming behind, and Fareen. And Fareen wandered from the path. You know, he'd been up there on those glaciers in Alaska before, but he wandered from the path. And Dave got to us. And I remember Dave, we said, where's the other person that's with you? And he looked back in shock because Fareed was gone. So we went back, we got him out of the crevasse, and he was dead. And we tried our hardest to breathe life back into him. We were pumping on his heart. George Wickman, a doctor, helped. We all did it. You know, I just pressed my mouth to Fareed's and breathed as hard as I could. And it was just awful. It's like the second or third day out. And, you know, we were just in a daze. And, you know, we spent that night in the tent. The next day, a storm was coming in. We built an igloo. And we just didn't know what we were going to do. You remember that, don't you, Dave? And something like that, people have different reactions to. Greg Blomberg was, look, guys, you know, there's no more fun and joy in this for me. We should just go home. This mountain's going to be here next year. His heart was totally out of the climb. Ray Genet, however, just being Ray, he said, come on, you know, I'm on construction jobs. People fall, they die, the work goes on. We should keep going. John Edwards was very thoughtful. He said, let's just think about it for a while. Let's just mull this over for a day or two. George Wickman was like, I could just as glad go back. Dave, I think you wanted to go on, didn't you, Dave? Yeah. And after we talked this over, you know, Greg said, I don't climb for this. I climb for the joy of being out there. And I said, Dave, none of us climb for this. None of us want this. But do we just all go back right now? And I think maybe it was you, Dave, or somebody said, well, Fareen would have wanted us to go on. Well, maybe, maybe not. But anyway, we decided that we would go on. But it was kind of like, it was our initial joy was gone. Now, when I wrote -148, you know, it's nonfiction, and it's real people, and they're your friends. And yet I wanted to write honestly. So I wrote about how Greg was not the, shall we say, gung-ho leader that he'd been. You know, he was just affected by the death and the accident. And he bore all that weight of responsibility on his shoulders because he was the leader and this had happened. And so I really admired him enormously for continuing on as you know, to help look after us, to be a leader with us after he had to go through that horrible experience. And so anyway, you know, I'm sort of jumping ahead, but after our climb, I wouldn't see Greg for about 18, 19 years. It wasn't, we weren't estranged, it was just he was living down on an island down by Lopez Island in the Puget Sound area. And he had avoided reading the book for 19 years. Somebody had told him that I'd done a hatchet job on it. When he finally read it, he said, no, you didn't. I'm fine with everything you wrote. But it was really hard to write about our shortcomings, my own as well. You know, I would get on these guys' nerves. I got some funding for our trip from the Institute of Arctic Biology. So I did some little memory tests at different elevations. The other thing I had to do was I was supposed to take some blood samples. So, okay, it's time to take you. Roll up your sleeve, you know. Oh my God, man. I was the last person anyway. They see me coming, they ask, oh my God. But anyway, we started up the mountain. And, we started finding some cold weather when we got to about about 10,200, that Windy Corner area. It was about 42 below, and by the time we got to that basin, about 14, it was about 45 below, and it stayed cold. And I want to read something that I experienced when we went up from the basin 14 up to 17,000. I didn't include this in the book. I don't know why. I wasn't avoiding doing it, but I did. But to me, it expresses part of my joy of being up in the mountains. And I have a feeling all of you had experiences, maybe many experiences, somewhat like it. So we've been camping at the 14,000 level. Our high camp is going to be at 17,000. And you go up sort of a fairly somewhat steep slope. Some of you have been on it. You know, often you set ropes, you know, just in case you tumble or something. And so it was on our last trip up the ridge. I was with 2 or 3 guys. And I said, look, you guys go on. I'll just sleep right here on the ridge at about 16,000. And so our camp was a big snow cave we made. It was up at 17.2 or 17.3, whatever it was. And climbing on the ridge was not dangerous. In my view, there were no crevasses. You're on the ridge. It's not that steep. So it was about 45 below. And I just got in my sleeping bag. We had great big warm sleeping bags. And I leaned back against the rock. And after a little while, the moon rose. And it was a full moon. And it was unbelievable. This is the way I try to write about it. The night was dark. Then the first pale light of the moon touched the highest peaks. Soft light flowed like an incoming tide, illuminating snow and ice as it worked its way down the ridges to glaciers below. Time seemed to slow down. As the moon slowly moved across the sky, places that had been bathed in light gave way to shadows, and shadowed places took on light. As light moved in and out of the shadows, it felt as if the entire range was slowly breathing. I stayed awake most of the night, watching the movement of moonlight over the range. It was like a symphony of light. And it could only be seen from high on the peak. And only if you're up there in winter, because it's light in the summertime. And then you have to have clear skies. And it was just that feeling like this was something that nobody had ever witnessed before. And may not witness again for some long time. And I have a feeling that all of you have memories somewhat like that. You're out on some peak of the Chugach, on some river, some glacier. The sunlight breaks through the clouds. You think, like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And that's the way it is. So anyway, that for me, and I think for all of us on that climb, the beauty of being on the mountain was a big, big part of what drew us to the mountain winter and sustained us. Now, we waited a couple of days at 17,000 at that camp, and there was some wind. 2 or 3 guys started up one day, and it was windy, came back, and finally there was a morning when, there wasn't that much wind. And so we set out, Dave, Ray Genet and I, and also Greg Blomberg and Shiro. We got up to Denali Pass, and Greg was like, I'm just not feeling it today. John Edwards and Wickman, they were a little tired, so they stayed back. So Shiro, who was a strong climber, the kindest, most careful, thoughtful guy you could know, he said, Greg, I'll go down with you. So he took it back down that, whatever you call it, from Denali Pass down to that pace at the 17th Street. And Dave and Ray and I went on. And you're climbing up there, and I just remember we take several breaths and then another step. The higher we got, we take 5 or 6 breaths and another step. And I'm climbing along like this, and I said, I remember, so I'll put this on for effect. I said, Dave, it's getting dark. It's gonna be night pretty soon. And he says, all right, why don't you take off your dark glasses? Oh, okay. So we continued on, but at some point we realized that it would be dark by the time we reached the summit. But look, it was still not a breath of wind, and we could see the stars. And we were close. And so we kept going, and we got to the top, and I think we may have turned on our headlamps just before we got to the top. It was 57 below zero, and way in the distance, looking to the south, you can see a little bit of green light, like little plankton, but it's phosphorescent. That was Anchorage, And so we stayed there for a few minutes, and I was kind of anxious to go. I mean, just kind of anxious. So eventually we started down, and it was kind of eerie because, hey, I went in the lead, Dave anchored behind, and Ray was in the middle. And so the south face is to our left. I mean, just boom, it drops off incredibly. Over here, you just wander over snow until, glaciers or whatever. And every once in a while, I was following our niches in the snow and ice on the way up. I mean, we went to Willow Wanting, the whole thing. And every once in a while, I'd lose track of them. And so then Dave would be back on the path, and I would go back and forth. But I was so tired, and we're a couple of decrepit-looking old men. I mean, it's hard to imagine we climbed a mountain, but in those days we were pretty fit, But just climbing down, my legs were buckling. So we got down to Denali Pass, and then we had a decision to make. We had left our sleeping bags there, a piece of parachute tarp, that's sort of like a tent type thing we could pull over us, a little bit of food, a little stove that was full of gas, just in case we needed to bivouac on the way down. So Dave, you remember, I don't know if you want to tell them, but you wanted to head on down that night, didn't you?
Yeah, there's more food down
We love this guy, there's more food down there. No, but Dave said, maybe he was feeling stronger than me at least. And I'm saying, come on, look, we got this steep slope. We're really tired, it's dark. Let's just sleep, get some rest, and go down in the daylight. So we went back and forth for a few minutes. And we finally, Dave said, okay, we'll spend the night. And it seemed like the best decision. And so we got into our sleeping bags. And then the wind woke us up. And we didn't know it, but a massive storm was coming across Alaska. And the way it goes through the range, the wind funnels in certain places, and particularly in a pass. So we're between the two summits of Denali. So there was a strong prevailing wind, but it just funneled through there. So we were just like, God, this has got to die down in an hour or two, something like that. So we huddled there for a while. And then the parachute ripped away from us. And I tried to grab it, and Gray did, and our hands got frostbitten. They turned white just like that. You see, it wasn't like a humid weather change where the air temperature warms up. Just a high wind and some high cirrus-type cloud. So it was still, we didn't take the measurement. It was probably 48, 50, 53, 4 below zero with this incredible wind. And Dave had the energy and the presence of mind to say, we got to dig in. So on hands and knees, he started chipping away at the ice. And we each helped a little bit, but it was mostly Dave. And I owe the rest of my life to this guy. Because at the moment we had to get out of that wind, Dave, you're the guy who, on your hands and knees with your ice axe.
I love digging.
Because I love digging, yes! Thank God he loved digging. Dave, do you want to share any thoughts about that moment, that right there?
Yeah, it was just kind of no-brainer for you. Everything's blown away. I remember watching a Celtic practice go, or whatever the kind of practice was. And the obvious thing is just to get underground as quick as you can. There's a really good book that anybody who's going up on Denali ought to read. It doesn't have to be winter, but Andy Hall did a great job of telling the story of the 1967 Wilcox expedition. And there's a really good section in there by Blaine Smith, just telling what it can be like up there. Even those strong guys can get in trouble really fast. So that is a good book to get humbled by. And our story too. It doesn't have to be winter though.
But the thing is, when that wind comes up, if you haven't prepared or you're not familiar with it, you can get trapped. And I know maybe some of you have done this too. Sometimes I read about maybe some English blokes that come over here, they got their hands frostbitten. They just didn't know what it was going to be like. But anyway, we dug this little cave. Now, it was so narrow that it was too narrow for all three of us to lay flat on our back. Somebody had to always be on their side. And when you were on your side, your upper shoulder would brush against the little ice crystals, and these little snow ice crystals would fall down on you, which was not too pleasant. But we figured, we weren't worried. We had a stove, we had a little gas, we had, a couple lunches, a little bit of food. A wind like this is it's gonna die down tomorrow. Well, it's just pounding and pounding and pounding and roaring. And, it didn't die down the next day, nor the next day, nor the next day. After about 3 days, our friends had tried to come up, and they could climb up towards Denali Pass, but when they got close to the pass, that funneling of the wind, they could not move. And after about 3 days, as they wrote in their journals, it's just hope gives out for the three above. So first two of them, and then the other two, descended the mountain. There's just no hope that we can be alive. They knew we had just disappeared. There was no sign of us. They knew we couldn't survive in this kind of wind and this kind of cold, and they just left. We were sort of moved, as I recall, in and out of consciousness. And sometimes I wouldn't know if I was really awake or dreaming. You're sort of half awake, half asleep, and the altitude is getting to you, you're getting dehydrated, and that wind, that infernal wind, is just pounding on you. And so, after about, I think it was the fifth day, Dave recalled that he had put aside a little canister of gas, because we run out of water, and we didn't have anything to melt it because we run out of gas. And he'd been up there previously with Vin Holman, I think, camped on the summit, and he remembered caching a little canister of gas. He described to Ray Genet where he put it. And Ray Genet went out in the storm, and we thought we'd never see him again. Never see him again. And a long, long, long time. Finally, we heard at the front edge, the entrance to our cave, we heard some sound, and he came in. He was just moaning. It was so cold. He had found the gas. Then we could make water, and that was huge. Well, the wind kept up for another day or two. Turns out we eventually spent 6 nights in that cave. And the last night, before that last night, finally, on that day, we woke up and the wind was gone. And we were like 3 people that had sort of partial brain, partial sense, partial judgment. There were times that Ray Genet wanted to just go out and charge down the mountain. There was one time I said, and I wrote about it, I said, hey guys, I'll go down. I think I can get down and I'll call for help. But I was really trying to save my own ass, And I would have tried to get them help, but it's just, you're stuck in the situation like, what do you do? We're getting weaker and weaker. Finally, I think it was the morning of the 6th day, the wind was gone, and we crawled out, and I can remember trying to stand up and just tumble over. We were so weak, so dehydrated. And we were also suffering from altitude more than we thought we would. Remember when I talked about early on with Shiro and I, we're talking, hey, it's kind of the unknown. We don't know what we're going to find up there. Well, that's kind of almost a romantic idea. It's a kind of exciting idea. You go out in a new mountain range, what's it going to be like? Well, one thing we found was that the surface of the glacier is much different in winter. The other thing, as some of you know, is that in the wintertime, particularly on a mountain far northern or far southern latitude, the oxygen is thinner than it would be like in the Himalayas, more around the equator. The Earth's two things. You know, when something is warm and hot, it expands. So the atmosphere goes up. The midline of the atmosphere is further up. The other thing is the Earth is not a perfect sphere. It spins and it's a little bit oblong. So only after we got back did we find out that on the summit, we were breathing air that had the oxygen equivalent of being at about 23,000 feet, say on Everest or someplace in the Himalayas. So at Denali Pass, we were at about 20,000 feet. And we're just knocked out. And between the three of us, we barely had judgment. But one thing we did that the Wilcox party didn't, but I'm glad we did, is we stuck together. But that last day when the wind was gone, we went out, we could barely stand up. It was hard to put our boots on because our feet were swollen, our hands were swollen. And it was a complete whiteout. We were much more tired than we'd been that first night when we decided, let's rest. And it was just, you couldn't see. I mean, I couldn't see you. I couldn't see you, Joe. It was just that thick. No wind, but a thick, thick, thick cloud. You couldn't tell up or down, right or left. And so it's like, what are you gonna do? We hadn't had anything to eat we're just so weak from nothing to eat. If we started down, that's fairly steep. People have fallen off in the summer and hurt themselves and died going down from Denali Pass. And here we can barely stand up. And where are we going? We're just going off into this cloud. So we sort of stood there hoping our friends would come up. We didn't know what had happened to them. We kind of expected them to holler and to come up and say, guys, we're over here. Nothing. So it was like suicide to go down. It was like suicide to go back into that cave. We didn't have the strength to survive another night. I mean, literally our bodies were freezing from our extremities. Our minds were really addled. And there was a cache there, a little piece, old piece of tarp that was sticking out of the ice. One of the things Shiro had told me, the first time we went on Denali, is he said, Art, this is when we were starting up in the summertime on that first trip with the Osaka Alpine Club. Sometimes in the mountains, as in life, if there's only one way to survive or one way to succeed, you have to be ready to try every possibility to the very end. You can't just sort of try it, you can't try it almost all the way. You have to be ready. So, exhausted as I was, I started chipping at that canvas with my ice axe. Maybe something's under the ice. And it was, the metal of my axe was so cold, and the ice was cold, it just broke the tip of my ice axe. And I was so exhausted, and I could barely get my hands around the ice axe because their hands are so swollen from the freezing. And I remember being on my hands and knees, just like some mad person, just flailing and flailing and flailing at the ice. But I chipped down a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then I could lift up the tarp a little bit. And I couldn't believe what I saw. It was a colander for like washing fruit. A colander. What the heck is a colander doing up there? Brad Washburn. But anyway, it was probably a cache for Brad Washburn. I went a little further, and finally I opened up this little bag, and I gotta tell you, I really loved raisins. And you know what it was? It was this box of Sun-Maid raisins. The packaging was out of date by 30, 40 years, but it was still Sun-Maid. And I think Al was smiling at us. And there were some dried potatoes. And I remember there was a can of ham that we wanted to eat too, but it had been punctured. So what do? We really want to eat it? But maybe it's, rotten or something. Anyway, then we had an easy decision. We went back into the cave. We cooked up a dinner. We had raisins and potatoes and whatever else was in there. And Dave was our master chef. Boy, oh boy, he did. And
Like being near the stove.
what's that?
Or it's like being near the stove.
You want to go on a real adventure? Hey, get this guy to go with you. I tell
It
you.
was a pretty third world sort of snow cave.
Third world sort of
We've learned
stuff.
how to build palaces now.
Yeah.
Heck with the tents, just carry 3 shovels. Dig and dig and dig.
That's right. So anyway, the next, I'll just wrap this up here, and I'm hoping for some questions or thoughts or whatever. Then, it was still very hard to stand, and we were wobbling on our feet, but we managed, you know, I think, Dave, your hands were better than mine and Ray, so you helped tie our crampons on. We roped together, and we started down that kind of steep slope beneath Denali. We're about halfway down, and Ray Shanae says, my crampon's off, coming off. So we're right on this thing, we're just teetering there, and we helped Ray get his crampon back on. And then we come down to where our camp is, and we're surprised that our guys haven't come out to see us yet. We open the flap we had a canvas flap over the entrance of the tent. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. I mean, it's just empty. Now, in the middle of the cave, there was just a little bit of food, like a little bit of cheese. My grandmother made some fruit cakes. There was a little fruit cake there. And we thought, oh gosh, thankfully they left it for us to eat. So we went on down the ridge, down to, you know, the 16-something point, and then down that slope. But when we went down that slope, down to the basin at about, whatever it is, 14.4 or something like that, clouds were laying in there. And Dave was leading. I think I was at the tail end, and Ray was in the middle. And another whiteout. We're still exhausted. We managed to get down from the altitude, and air is a little thicker, but it's still cold. And we have to go to this whiteout. We can't just stay there in the open. We had actually 2 igloos we built in that basin. And Dave had uncanny sense of where they were, basically in total whiteout condition. And we were so exhausted. I remember the snow being 2 or 3 feet of soft snow, and I'd take 2 or 3 steps, and I just would collapse, pick myself up. I'd hear Ray Shanae groaning, wait, and we were just floundering through this stuff. And, you know, Ray would say, it's off to the right. And I might say, Dave, it's to the left. He just kept going. And then he said, Yahoo! He led us right straight to that igloo. And as I recall, Dave, there was just a little bit of our little bamboo thing, willow wand showing up from the top. It had been a massive amount of snow the storm had brought in, but we could dig it out. And again, we thought, God, what are we going to find inside? I mean, if everybody's alive, they'd be outside. Maybe they died here. And we opened it up, and yeah, there was a little food and stuff left over, but nobody. We just didn't know what had happened. Had they died? Had they tried to go down in a whiteout? Because, see, at that basin, some of you have been up there, you know, if you're in a whiteout, you can just walk off the edge of it, right? Or the other thing is, so exhausted you are, if you get off the path, you've wandered down, like we were afraid earlier, we might wander down on the Peters Glacier and, you know, not have the strength to come back up. So where were our guys? So anyway, we're outside that tent, I think that's what it was. We'd seen some jets flying around Denali. That's strange, what are they doing up here? We had no idea they were looking for us or something. And Sheldon came in, tipped his wings, and he dropped a package. And I thought, oh, great, cheeseburgers. Thank you, Don. And I, you know, very slowly, you know, walked over, and it was a black box. And it was like, you know, it's like something had fallen out of the sky that's totally useless. We can't eat this thing. We don't know what it was. And you gotta imagine sort of like 3 people with sort of prehistoric ape IQs looking at this. What is it? Finally, one guy says, I think it's a radio. I mean, our patterns were really low. We couldn't get it to work. So then that morning we went on down. We had frostbite. And you know, the ends of our feet were still frozen. There was a point where the flesh was really tender. Every step was really, really painful. But hey, we were alive. We came down. We made it. And we're going to go on down to the igloos that we built down at 10,000 feet something by Hill in the Pass. But still, again, where are our guys? Where are they? What's up? So anyway, we start down. We get down to Windy Corner. And then, you know, we get a radio going, or they drop us another one, and all of a sudden it's guys who are going to come pick you up. No, it's okay. We'll just go down. So between Dave and Janae and I, it's like I think you in particular were saying, no, we're just going to go down. It's no big deal, you know. I mean, we're back. We're through the rough part, and the pilot said, you know, I mean, they're trying to come rescue these guys, and they're saying, no, just go on, have a great day. But, you know, it's like we knew we could go down and we didn't need to be rescued. But then I'm thinking, you know, Dave, I mean, they're really going out of their way to try to help us. And they were also saying, guys, you don't know it, but another storm is coming in. Another storm is coming in. Sometimes people ask me, what's the difference climbing today and back then? Two things I think of. One is, back then, you didn't have young women climbing, or even hardly backpacking. Whether it's Title IX or changing of times, now there's lots of young women and older women who love the mountains. They get out there, they climb, they ski, they backpack. And my own daughter loves doing this stuff. And so, but the other thing, big change, is the communication. You see, if we'd had mobile phone or some kind of radio phone that we could have called in from the summit, somebody would have told us, you guys, there's a huge storm coming in. And so we would have gotten down, I tailed it down to Denali Pass and then down to the cave. We might not have even gone up the day before. So, but we would not have camped it if we'd known that storm was coming in. And so there never would have been a book, and we would be sitting here this evening. So we have to live with what happens. But anyway, we accepted that ride, and we came back down. And, you know, it's Shiro and George Wickman were at the igloo just below Cahill in the Pass. And it took another, storm came in for about 4 or 5 days. When rescuers on the ground finally got to him, he said, have you found their bodies? It was the first thing that Shiro said. And the guy said, they're alive. They're back in Talkeet. I just started crying, you know. And, you know, I was able to see Shiro. His visa had expired, so he came up to the hospital. And Dave and I and Ray were sitting in there just eating and eating and eating. When we looked at ourselves, when we actually got undressed, you know, and could see, we looked like concentration camp victims, you know. Our knees are knobby, our muscles, we'd been fit, but each of us lost 30, 40 pounds. And we were just barely had the reserves to make it down. So one thing I want to touch on very, very briefly, and I just want thoughts, questions, or you can tell me some stories of your own, but you know, an experience like that, having a friend basically die in your arms, and then being left for dead yourself, you know, you go on, and you're yourself, and you do this and that, but looking back over the years, I realized that each of us was affected in different ways. Now, for Ray Genet, he had been, is this still working? Can you all hear me? Okay. You know, Ray Genet, like I tell you, he just talked his way onto our climb, you know. But after that climb, he became incredible climber. And he, again and again and again, somebody's lost out there, he'd go out, he'd parachute down, they'd land him with a helicopter, he'd go pluck people off mountains. He worked a lot with Don Sheldon. And he started his guiding service. It was like to the summit. He had this incredible drive. He became this larger-than-life Alaskan person, climber. And as some of you may know, he at about 57, that seemed very young to me now, but anyway, at about 57, he went over to climb Everest. Now, he'd been sick before he left. He had to spend a few days in the hospital in Kathmandu. He got out to the camp, went up on the mountain, wasn't as strong as he could be, and he reached the summit, and on the way down, he stopped. And he was just sort of huddled with the Japanese woman who's climber, and they both died in the night. And I think that Ray was part of his psyche that he never fails, that he is always going to go on. And I think that he pushed himself too hard. And I think that's something for all of us, especially young people here. You know, there are times to turn back. You got to use judgment. You have other times you can go out there. it's not heroic to go out there and die. But anyway, that changed Ray Genet's life. He became this larger-than-life person. Dave, I know you had talked to me earlier when we were in the Catch at the Spires about wanting to have a family. And that Dave built a beautiful cabin and another beautiful cabin, a wonderful life and wonderful father. Greg Blomberg, I don't think he ever climbed again. It was the most miserable experience in his life. He was just singed and seared by it. He was so happy we survived. He said, I couldn't have survived. I couldn't have stood it if you guys had dead. And he thought for about a week that we were dead. In some ways, those guys camped our partners. They had it rougher than us. We knew we were alive. We weren't giving up. We were trying to work together. But he and the others thought we were dead, that we just disappeared, and all the macabre thoughts they had. It was horrible for them. But anyway, Greg has had a beautiful life living on Lopez Island. He's got a community of people there. Lots of work he does with young people and with nature, and his wife is a Native American there. He did different things related to that. And for me, I went on, and I didn't really feel like I was going to stop climbing. I loved climbing as much as ever, but I had a child on the way, and I got married. The other thing I noticed it only later when I started to write my memoir. And you say, well, how did I get to this point in my life to that point? One of the things I wrote or quoted in Minus 148 was that I think that each of us experienced, if only for a moment, what Saint-Exupéry, the writer, spoke of as that new vision of the world born through hardship. And looking back at it now at 80, now 81, I got that. I didn't get that quite right. It's more like the hardship was embedded in me. I found myself drawn to trying to save wildlife, or whales, or caribou that were threatened by, kind of the winds of greed and bottom lines. And I was drawn to Native Alaskans who were struggling. I was drawn to people who were struggling to survive, but they hadn't sought adventure. They hadn't sought a new vision of the world born through hardship. They were often born to hardship. And it's only looking back that I start to see that connection back to that time. Incredibly thankful to have survived and to have close friendship with Dave and Greg and the others until they passed away. There's just the three of us now. And I'll leave you with this one thought from this, and I want questions if you've got some. There was a mountaineer in Europe, known more for being a writer and a philosopher, Viktor Frankl. He wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. And something that he got from his experience of being in a concentration camp and just holding on, and hoping others could hold on, helping others to hold on. He said, try to live as if you've already died. You're dead, but now you have a chance to come back and live as you really want to live. Make the decisions that are really important to you. And I think that's something that probably any number of people who, whether on a polar expedition or out at the sea or at war or on a mountain, if you go through something really harrowing and you know, and we knew for 4 or 5 days in a row, I mean, it wasn't likely that we were going to come back. But you're given that second chance to live, and I think, I know just for myself, I've known that made a difference and helped guide kind of the person I can become. And fortunately, I've got a wonderful wife and some kids, so I think we're all affected by it. So anyway, enough said. Any thoughts? Any questions? You have a question?
Remember that food at the very first, the food at the very first, it was
Yeah. Oh, this is interesting. Remember I mentioned there was just a little tiny pile of food in the middle of our cave? So when Shiro came back to Alaska 9-10 years later, I sent him a copy of the book and I said, Shiro, did I get it right? Did I tell our story? Was it true? He said, yes, everything except one thing. I said, oh, what was that? He said that, thanks for reminding us, that food you found at that snow cave, that ice cave, at 17,200, it wasn't, we didn't leave it for you. He says, in Japan, many of us are influenced by the Shinto belief, And if you wander in the woods in Japan, you'll find little bits of food here. You know, a little crotch of a tree on a rock or someplace. And people come out and they leave it for the spirit of someone they've loved who's no longer with us. They leave that little offering for a spirit. So that wasn't meant for you to find and eat. You were dead. Anyway, some more questions.
Yeah, I actually had 4 questions, that was one of mine. The first one was, and forgive me if I'm wrong on this, I thought that when Fareen's body was taken down to Talkeetna, I thought one of your party went down with him?
Yes, that's true. Ray Shanae left the mountain with
And
him.
then what prompted Ray to return then too? Because he was not party to your discussions that were happening on the mountain as far as whether.
Well, we'd already talked about, okay, look, we're gonna try to go on. And then, you know, we were able to, somehow maybe down there we had a radio, we were able to call to Sheldon. Sheldon came in and the 3 or 4 of us actually slid Fareed's body over to a landing spot. Shanae went off the mountain, he called Fareed's mother, they spoke Swiss, and then Ray came back and that was planned. That was planned.
And the second one was already answered here. The third question I had is, at Denali Pass, you guys were huddled down and just under brutal conditions. And I recall that you guys had like a tuna can that you were using both to melt water for and to use as a pee box.
I was trying to avoid that. Thanks for your encyclopedic memory.
But did you guys even?
You know, I remember Dave trying to cook, he said, Art, where's that can? I said, oh, I just took a pee in it. I mean, what do you, oh, I gotta cook it. So, and we had one little can and we used it, I don't know, we used it to make a pea or a crap, but we didn't have that much pea or crap in it, so but anyway, yeah, so that's true. Thanks for reminding me. Thanks for leaving all these people with that thought that we're cooking for our people.
But did you guys even care at that point? Were you just like?
No!
Yeah.
No, you know, I mean, just, we had to cook and whatever. And you had a 4th question.
The 4th one was, after you guys got down and after you got out of the hospital, did you climb together again? Did you remain friends?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think we did climb together again. We remained friends. There was no rift between us. But again, you know, John Edwards was a professor down at the University of Seattle. Greg moved down there. George von Wickman had his practice in Anchorage. We got together for some reunions. And of course, Dave lived up in Talkeetna, or near Talkeetna. And Dave, as you may know, he went back to try to climb Denali. How many years ago after the winter climb did Dave go back?
For the solo?
Yeah, for the solo.
It was 85.
85.
No, 86, sorry, 86.
So however many years that is, 9, 10 years. But,
20, 19.
20. And so Dave, actually, I think you started from your cabin, didn't you? Skied into the mountain.
Yeah, I had a good ski trip.
This guy's incredible. You can see why we survived, right?
Yeah, that was a good trip.
How high did you get before your feet started freezing?
Up to 13,000, up to Windy Corner, and I dipped a toe again. No health insurance yet, so I had to ski home again.
So he just skis down the
That
mountain,
was the
skis
best
back to his
home
cabin.
Kerry got the sauna hot when I got there.
Oh.
Really.
Let's hear it for Carrie and her wife.
Roger told me that he was on his way.
Our wife, because she's really good at carrying shit around. One of the big excitements on Denali was every time we got a new low temperature record. It was really exciting just to see what it's going to be like camping and climbing in 50 below sort of stuff. And it's still exciting.
Tell about your best day in the mountains.
What I was going to say, we were out of food for a while, and boy, when we got to the hospital at Bassett Army Hospital in Fairbanks, this guy really set records. There were people coming up from the kitchen to see if it was really true. He had 19 eggs for breakfast. One breakfast. That was heaven. But we were still really goofed up. We had food hidden under the mattresses and cabinets.
You still do that.
See, we're all affected in different ways, but
Oh, I should mention, Tom Choate has a really good record that I'm never going to threaten, that's for sure. He's claimed Denali every 10 years for a long time. What is the oldest now?
The best thing we ever did was when you and I left that cache up at the pass that you found that saved you.
you think that was your cache? I thought it was Washburn's. It was from a long, long time ago, the one we found in the wintertime.
It was just a plastic
The one-
4-ounce bottle full of
Where we
white
left
gas.
the fuel.
The fuel.
Oh, the fuel,
was
okay,
theirs.
cool.
And I left it there because I was way too lazy to carry it down. And I'm kind of glad we did.
Yes.
Yeah, we would have been really skinny without that gas.
We'd still be up there, probably.
Oh, I remember when Art described coming out of the cave. I remember Janae looking up at me. Oh, he looks like Herman Boole after Nanga Parbat. He looked so old.
Oh, his eyes are way sunken in and cheeks going, it was, and of course, we couldn't see our own face. Each of us, probably our faces were like.
Which was a blessing.
Which was
Yeah, good job, Art. Wow.
Among other things, it's always great to have somebody on an expedition who can get you laughing.
He's really kind.
This guy's my hero. I wouldn't be alive without him. We're all fortunate to have him.
I just go on trip to try to get the mission underway. If there are any differences, I just write it up in the journal. And Art really kindly used the journal, but edited out a lot. Actually, some of it came out as live warfare, but it wasn't. Not as bad as it sounded. Yeah, we're still good buddies. And if he gets his memoirs published, we've read them and they are terrific. He's got a big heart and all kinds of cool stories.
I better grab this mic. Dave's such a great guy. So yeah, another question.
Another question. So we just heard that Dave did return to Denali. Did you ever return to Denali? And if not, was that an intentional action not to go back, or?
I actually returned 2 different times.
Okay.
A couple of years later, and well, before my next expedition, while my feet were still healing. Oh, by the way, yeah, I had, you know how they heal frostbite? They treat it in the hospital to see how much will grow back. So particularly this foot, they just wanted me to keep soaking it in Fiso. I'll come back to your answer there in a moment. And soaking it in a whirlpool of Fiso X disinfectant. But I'm walking around with this black toe. Smells like a dead mouse.
Yeah.
So one night up at the Institute of Arctic Biology, I sort of put my foot up like this. I found a razor blade, sterilized it under a match, and just started whittling away until I got down to the flesh. So the next day they said, okay, we'll finish that off for you. But anyway, that next summer, I had previously, before going on Denali, I talked with Dave Roberts, Dave was with us in the Kichat Aspires, and Dave put together a group of his buddies from Harvard, and I couldn't really climb, but we went out to this range that didn't have a name. And it's out beyond even out beyond, I think, Kachatna Spires, and wild-looking peaks. Nobody been in there. And we got hammered by the storm. And actually, I think it was the same storm that the Wilcox guys got caught in and had a disaster on Denali.
Ooh. So just 6 months after your winter ascent?
Yeah.
That same
yeah.
summer?
So I couldn't really climb, but I was there. And we tried to keep this igloo going, but we'd have to patch it with snow otherwise, because it kept melting. And there was like a little stream that ran through it. But we had a great time. And so we said, well, maybe, what are we going to call these peaks? So Dave Roberts, who is the most unreligious person you can imagine, but he happened to be taking a course at the University of Denver about the Bible. So he's reading aloud from the book of Revelation. So George Milliken, one of the two grandsons of George Mallory, who was with us, Rick and George, grandsons of Mallory. So George says, let's call this train the Revelations. So that's why we have the Revelations today. It was kind of the fitting the gloom and doom. But anyway, I did that the next summer, and I think the next summer I still had broke, I was young, I was newly married, I have one child, and I was scraping for a living, and the Institute of Arctic Biology got funding from our preliminary work on high altitude physiology, and they asked me to come back and lead a group of scientists, which I did, and I enjoyed that. And coming back to the mountain, our mission was not to go to the summit, but rather to do different physiological tests, and we went as high as, I think, as 16,000 feet. But there was kind of an interesting experience I had there. You all know about Don Sheldon, right? So nobody had landed a plane or a helicopter at that 14,000 little plateau, but Don, that's where Don was going to try to fly us in with his super plane. And I was on the first flight in. And so we came in, and it's just total concentration, because you're coming in and there's a cliff, and you've got to aim it right. There's not too much wind, but a little bit sets down, and we glide to a stop. And the snow, if we step outside, we sink in about 2 feet. Get on snowshoes, and we start stamping a runway, because we're going to have to compact the snow if he's going to get off. And so finally he says, let's give it a go. So I get back in the back, so I could lift the back wheel up out of the snow, and he guns the motor, and the plane shakes and jumps in place. Finally, it starts creeping down the runway. He gets to the end of the runway, and he's just going slow. Now the slope starts to gradually go down towards Windy Corner. And I watch him go, and I said, this is crazy, he's not going to take off. And then he disappears, and then I can't hear him. And I'm standing there on the mountain by myself, and it's like, oh my God. And I'm waiting for him to see his plane come up and hear it in the distance. Nothing. And I went down as far as the end of the runway, but I didn't really dare go down to Windy Corner because there's crevasses there, and I'm totally by myself. I've got a sleeping bag and a little food and a stove, but it's just like, I just seen Don Sheldon die. About 2.5 hours later, way out of the hill, little plane that comes back up, and it's Sheldon. He unloaded a couple of research docks and some of the equipment, and he said, when only I could hear, he says, well, all right, we just about ended the career of old Don Sheldon back there. There's these big yawning crevasses at Windy Corner, and he said, I lifted off just about 5, 6, 8 feet in front of the first one. And so that was kind of an interesting thing. So yes, I did go back to Denali, and then a few years later, one of my older son from my first marriage, he was 19, and he got the idea he wanted to go up there, so I started 44 or 5 at the time. Felt like I was pretty old, so I started running upstairs and all that kind of stuff, and trying to get in shape. We went back and we climbed the West Buttress. It was summertime, it was good weather. It was just one of those enjoyable climbs. And it was funny, coming up, I'm not surprised. Coming up just to where you crest onto Denali Pass, tears start streaming down my face. It was just so emotional. I hadn't thought about it, planned on it. I wasn't feeling morose. It was just all of a sudden, just the emotion. The last time I was here, man, it was just hanging on. Yeah. Anyway, some more questions, please. Yes.
You took a lot of movies when you were up there in 1968. Where are those?
Well, I took some film. It really turned out that I thought I was going to be a filmmaker, and I started filming the mountains, and I'd love to do it. But it turned out that, once we got up above, higher on the mountain, it was 45, 50 below, it was so hard to keep ourselves warm, let alone the camera, let alone the film. It gets very brittle. So I just didn't take any dough further up the mountain. And interestingly enough, since you bring this up, it was probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, a TV producer got in touch with me. He said, look, we'd like to do a mini TV series on your winter climb. So this and that, we talked to him, I talked to Dave, I talked to Greg. They said, well, okay, we're not really looking for publicity, but the thing is, what they had in their contract is that they had the liberty to rewrite some things. And it turns out they wanted to do partly the story of our wives and sweethearts down below. Oh my God, are they still alive? And this and that. And it was just like, yeah, they would have provided some money, but I tried so hard, and with the help of my friends, and I really relied on Dave's journals, kept really great journals, and temperature at this altitude, what we did, that was a great aid. And all the way through in writing, I tried to tell it truthfully, even if I wasn't putting myself in the best light all the time. I get on people's nerves, we all do. You're out in a situation like that, that's natural. It's not that you become enemies or anyone's bad, it's just you're very tired, you're exhausted, all the strain. But anyway, so we decided not to do that film. It's just we had our experience, and we'll just let it stand at that.
I think Dave wants to say something.
Oh, Dave, here you go. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to all of you real climbers that are still out there cruising around the world, writing up your stories to feed you Steve for free. Because it's been a real wonderful thing to read through the graphite colored winter. And thanks for all your stories and all your climbs.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a real boost.
Tell about
Keep
the other
up the
time you
great
went on Denali, Dave.
work.
Yeah, tell about going back, Dave. Tell about going back to Denali. If you want to.
Father's
Well,
Day.
that was definitely the best day in the mountains ever. Got to the summit on Father's Day with the whole family. That was really neat. We'd taken Galen up to Everest Base Camp to see how he would do at altitude. And it was a simple answer, same as at home. Ran circles around us.
How old was he, Dave?
He was 11 when he got up to the top. Maybe he'll beat Tom's record someday.
Bath time.
And you were 59 and I was 48.
Tom was a guardian angel on our 63 trip. We got to camp within about probably 150 feet of the summit, Vin and I. But Tom, meanwhile, was taking care of the weaker guy in the party, Cliff Ells, who was having troubles. Tom got him up to both summits. That was really neat. He's a kind cat. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Yes.
So at one point in your talk, you mentioned, you pointed to the difference between the guys that had such a tragedy over in the north side later that year. And you said,
Wilcox.
yeah, the Wilcox expedition, and you said, well, we stuck together. And these days, it's come more to light that this human factor is so important. You know, you hear it talked about a lot, especially in ski mountaineering and backcountry skiing. Would you add anything to that statement in terms of if it goes to the art of survival in dangerous conditions in the mountains?
Well, we all have this, we want to live, right?
Yeah.
And that sometimes is at odds with, do I stick with my friends? and we do everything together. And the three of us, now our other friends that went down the mountain, I should say that none of us, Dave, none of us felt bad that they left. I mean, that was the rational, logical thing to do. We've never for a moment blamed them for leaving us up there. But fortunately, I think the three of us stood together. That's how we survived. At different points, each of us did one or two things that saved us all. And, you know, and I think each of us, we have inside us, we have strengths that we don't draw on until we're in a tough situation. And sometimes we're by ourselves, or somebody goes off on their own. But, you know, something that means a lot to me, and actually it was Daryl Miller, who I was hoping was going to be able to be here with us tonight. He reminded me of a film that I think it was Houston made, called The Brotherhood of the Rope. And it could be the Sisterhood of the Rope as well. But it's the whole idea that, as he described it, and as I think about it, that became such a part of, I think, I internalized that became part of my life. That, you know, we're going up there, and you're gonna risk your life for me. I'm counting on you stepping out of the way, risking your life, your hands, your feet for me, and I'll do the same thing for you. And so there's this mutual protection and help. And I think sometimes in this world today, a lot of that gets lost. And, you know, people are just out for themselves. I mean, God knows we see that in Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if that's touching on what you wanted to do.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing that's hard to put into words, but there's this beautiful communication that occurs between road partners and ski tour partners that allows you to make good decisions.
And I think, you know, I know experiencing, I was kind of a solo kind of person, and then, you know, I was sort of living to climb mountains. And actually before that, I'd been really much of a lost soul. I came out of high school with the nuclear weapons, you know, just looming over us. And Vietnam, like some of my age contemporaries here. And I was very affected by it. And my life was about trying to bring peace. And I started a big organization in Colorado. Eleanor Roosevelt gave me the charter for the whole country, the United Nations for studying foreign relations. And then I left college to work with Devi Prasad, the head of War Resisters International. He worked with Gandhi. That's what I cared about. And then I helped him with a conference in France, an international peace conference. You know, reaching out, trying to help and stop this. And then I became disillusioned. And because I didn't think these intelligent, kind, thoughtful people talking to each other in the countryside was going to end the nuclear arms race. There were 3 countries then that had nuclear weapons. Now there are 9. But I became disillusioned. I lived on the streets of Europe for a while, and just all kinds of different things. I just before coming to Alaska, some months, half year before that, a friend of mine passed away at Christmas time, a successful filmmaker later in life. We're sitting in, should I tell them about this kid? No, and I will. As long as I've started, you asked about something. Got me off this track. But the thing is, I was sort of, you know, I wasn't living, you know, I became disillusioned. I was kind of lost. And we're sitting there at a cafe in Tangiers, we're having a little mint tea, and we're saying, you know, this marijuana and hash is really cheap down here. It's pretty expensive up north in Scandinavia. So at 19, and my friend who was turning 20, I was the biggest hash and marijuana dealer in Europe. We, you know, took the first large shipments up to Stockholm. So, you know, I'm not living for others, am I? I'm not exactly the brotherhood of the rope kind of situation, except with my partner or something, you know. My purpose in life became don't get caught. But basically, when I left and came back to the States, great good fortune of my life, besides meeting my wife, having these children, so is coming to Alaska. And you know the geography changes, the terrain changes when you come over from the border. You know, you've been on that windy road again, and all of a sudden Mount Sanford, the Wrangles, and you look up in these river valleys, there's glaciers up there. And I just knew this is where I was going to live, and I've been traveling for a couple of years, year and a half or so. And I think that one of the things, and I only realized that looking back, through mountains I made a friend and then another friend. I was pretty a solitary kind of guy. I learned to be a partner on a rope and, you know, be there for my friends, be there for this guy and for others. And I knew they were there for me. And so I think that the mountains really healed me. It really healed me. And, you know, that's, yeah, they really healed me and helped me feel not so helpless. You know, you take on a challenge, you're able to get up flat top or suicide or some other mountain, you know, you feel good. And so I think I caught my breath and grew into myself and through those kinds of things. And so anyway, some more questions, thoughts? Yes?
So for years I've been trying to figure out what guys actually talk about when they're hanging out together or go camping. So do you have any memorable conversations from your 6 nights together in your cave? Or do you guys just apart and stay silent?
I'll tell you 2 memorable moments that may relate to your story, your question. I'm on Denali the first time in the summertime, and I'm sitting there, and you know, there's a little bit of Japanese radio in the background. You know, and everybody, you know, one person sitting around inside this big tent, Shiro or somebody saying, everybody laughs. The next guy says, yes, and everybody laughs. Finally it comes around to me, and Shiro says, now your turn, tell a erotic story. But you know, and the other memory that comes back is we're up there at the Institute of Arctic Biology, and now we're back, and people are interviewing us. And this nice young woman is a television or radio or some kind of interviewer. What were you thinking about up there? And I said, you know, I have to tell you, but for me, I wasn't really thinking about women at all or any romance. It was just food. In that situation. I mean, I can remember being up there. Your mouth is so dry, it's caked, you can't swallow. You know, you're starting to bleed in there. And just the thought of being like a kid again and having that hose, the garden hose, and being able to have the water coming in there. So, I don't know, people think different things, you know? And, you know, I'm sure we get up there in some of those places, we think about our sweetheart. I imagine gals sometimes think about, oh, that guy, you know, where is he now? But I think the mountains also take you to a whole different place. You know, I remember being frustrated about the illusion in life, the pretense, and people having their sort of hidden agendas, but the mountains don't have hidden agendas. They are. The mountains are, they're just there. Yes, there's danger, there's risk, there's storms. But if you can read the mountains and the weather right, you can make your way there. And so for me, the time I spent, and it's not just on Denali, some of my most wonderful days were back in the Chugach. Just back in the Chugach. And some of my most memorable times in the mountains where I didn't reach the summit. I'm climbing by myself. And I think some of those times we have either out there with a friend or a couple of friends or by ourselves, they can mean so much to you. So I don't know if there's any general answer to that, what guys think about up there. You know, I have been in a sleeping bag on Mount Seattle, Fred Becky, and I'm there and I think, oh, where's my Swedish girlfriend now? You know, yeah, I've thought that. But I think you think a lot of other things, yeah. So, yes?
Did the decision for you guys to like hunker down instead of descending down into the events that happened after change your thought process of the decisions you'd make on future climbs? On when to go down or whether you should stay where you're at?
Could you all hear that? I think she's asking that when we were at Denali Pass, we come down from the summit, we decided, debating between us, Dave wanted to come down that night. I said, no, let's rest, let's go down in the daylight. Has that changed our thinking in other decisions? Dave, I don't know, I don't think it has. Do you think so? Did you heard her question? In other words, we decided to stay there, and that turned out that put us in trouble. But I don't know that it has.
Actually, if we come down that night, it might have tidied up all the loose ends. It wouldn't have made much of a book, though.
But you know, I think you know, is Clint here tonight? Is Clint Elander here tonight? I didn't see him. But he's a wonderful writer and wonderful guy and wonderful climber if you get to have the good fortune to know him. And there's a quote that I can't say verbatim, but he basically said, you know, the mountains give us these challenges that help us realize our dreams. So in other words, in the mountains, we have moments of decision like that. And if you survive very long in the mountains, it's probably because you make good decisions and you think things through. You're taking on risk. You're taking on risk. And in a way, that's part of the excitement. Part of it, just part of it, is there something difficult to do? Can I do it? How can I do it? Can I have the physical strength to do it? Can I figure out the route? Can I work with my friends and everything? So I think that going through experiences like that, for me, helped me feel like, oh, I can figure out how to do this. You know, I was getting Joe for an early morning math class. He's 9 years old. And so we had to get him kind of early, and NPR radio's on. It's a broadcast from Baghdad. And a little story is the girl who writes to her father who's dead. She's 9 years old. I can hear her talking in the background. Well, anyway, I took Joe to school and this coaching soccer. And I thought later, well, maybe my voice, if her voice can reach me, maybe I can reach back. Now, that doesn't seem related to that decision on the Denali Pass, or maybe even to mountains. But I think when we're out there thinking things through, taking on some risk, taking on some challenge, figuring out how to do things. I'm getting the sign on the time, so I think that helps us later to sort of say, well, maybe I can figure out how to do that. So listen, I think we should wrap up. I think we have to leave, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Narrow time.
Okay, I'm sorry. My family, their nickname for me is Talks a Lot, so I'm sorry. So I'll tell you what, real quickly if we can. I'll talk to my family, and maybe we'll have a barbecue up at Rainbow sometime this summer. We'll send them